Hello, everyone. I'm so sorry not to be able to talk to you in person, but actually I was held sick at home and I decided not to spread germs during the AceConf. But I have this, thank you for this ability to talk to you online. I hope it's going to turn out just fine, although I would prefer to have this direct contact with you. So as Justyna mentioned, I was supposed to do a talk about the redesign of the system for one of the Polish banks. But during the pandemic, it turned out that there are some more interesting topics, I think, that interest me. And then 3 years in the IT industry and specifically regarding design, that's a lot. So I decided to change the topic. And I would like to talk to you today about the climate change and the product design and the digital world and internet and what these things have all in common. So right now, I'm a software design team leader at the BSH Home Appliances, the company known for their IoT app Home Connect and actual physical home appliances production that like Bosch or Siemens. And I came here today not to show any case studies or share my direct experience, but to shed a light on the topic of digital sustainability. We live in great times. It's 2022 and we never get lost because we have maps of the world in the palms of our hands. We never lose touch with our loved ones because we can FaceTime them anytime. And we don't need to memorize facts anymore because they are just there out in the Google or on Wikipedia. But all that technology doesn't come from nothing. It relies heavily on the electricity and also consumes resources. It all comes down to 3 different areas. The first one is end user equipment, basically our mobile phones, computers, IoT apps, even your oven that is connected through the Wi-Fi. It does use, it was produced and it uses electricity. Then there's the access networks, which means all that routers, wireless, cables that allow us to stay connected. And then the third and the biggest chunk, I think, is the data centers, which are these huge facilities that store a lot of our data. And all of these things, first of all, we need to manufacture and we need to spend resources on production. And then, of course, we use them on daily basis. We keep charging our phones and we keep our computers connected to the network. Data centers and access networks are live 24/7. So this is really all a lot of electricity, a lot of power that they use. So the scientists have a way of measuring environmental impact of basically anything. And for that, ones who are not yet familiar with the term carbon footprint, a quick recap. So basically, this tool, universal metric, allows us to compare pretty much anything by estimating how much greenhouse gases emissions, such as CO2 and methane, are produced. Why greenhouse gases are dangerous, I think we all know right now. Well, they cause the climate to get warmer, and we all know that warm climate is something really, really bad for us. Carbon footprint is measured in CO2 equivalent. So basically, it puts down all the other greenhouse gases, not only CO2, to one common denominator, and it's expressed in weight. So basically, we can estimate how much CO2 we emit to the atmosphere a year. Now, can you guess how much does the internet industry emit a year? Well, It's 1.6 billion tons a year, which accounts for about 4% of the global emissions. Just to give it a little bit of context, 4% of global greenhouse gases emissions is the same as aviation and shipping altogether. So you can see that this is pretty big chunk of all emissions. If the internet was a country, it would be basically the size of Germany or South Korea in terms of CO2 emissions. And you can ask, like, is that a bad thing? Well, of course, internet brings a lot of fabulous inventions, and we couldn't live with it. I think it's one of the greatest inventions of all time, and it needs to be there. It's not, discussion is not about if internet is good, but how we can make it better. But the same way we can restrict countries to emit certain limited amounts of greenhouse gases, why not think about the web in the similar way? In 2021, we consumed 79 zettabytes of data altogether. The number is ridiculous. It could be equally a gazillion bytes of data. It doesn't say anything. It's just a very, very big number. But if we look a little bit at the smaller numbers, well, every minute of a day, it's estimated that there is 75,000 new photos uploaded to Instagram. And if you give it a thought, one picture at around 1 megabyte gives us 65 gigabytes a minute of new fresh data. And we keep collecting and consuming more and more data such as this from users, but also from IoT devices that keep collecting data from everything nowadays. But we never really delete that data. We never get rid of it. So that data directly translates to the electricity spent on running data centers. In 2015, a group of scientists in the SHIFT initiative came up with scenarios for the future for the data growth, for the data centers growth. So as you can see, even in the best case scenario, that's that blue line, we see that the consumption by 2030 of electricity usage in terawatt hours is at around 1,000, which is a little bit more than total consumption of Poland in 2020. So we keep collecting that data and putting that in data centers. We rarely delete it permanently. When was the last time you removed a picture from your cloud? Or when was the last time you deleted an email from your spam folder? Well, it's still there, so it means that it's being still stored in some data center, probably in the Arctic Circle, and it's being computed, and someone is wasting resources on keeping that spam email. So global warming, it's a fact, and no one denies it. And greenhouse gases emissions, we know that they cause drastic changes in the weather conditions, and they will lead to constant droughts, floodings, food crises. By some people believe that if we don't go to zero carbon emissions as a humanity by 2050, we can't expect the worst case scenario for our planet. So today here we are all product people who contribute actively to the growth of the IT industry and digital. And how can we make sure that we do it responsible? So the good news is that on the web, there is already the conversation happening. There are some developers who started that talk at Microsoft. And there's also that initiative called Sustainable Web Manifesto that I really much love because it really summarizes core principles that we should follow. These guidelines will help you design and develop better solutions and maybe also make better product decisions. First of all, you should use clean power. We don't have full control over the sources of electricity used to access our websites or applications that we work on. But what we can do is to make sure that we host them on the solutions that are powered with renewable energy. There is a place online, the Green Web Foundation, and it lists right now 400 green hosting companies in 29 countries. So there is really a play. We can really make a good choice for our hosting solutions. Secondly, be efficient. Optimize your products so it uses less power to compute. In case of web design, try to use less images, compress them, and also use video very wisely, only if it is really needed. Efficiency is really the key to every sustainable process, and using only minimal resources that can achieve the goal. Only if we think about it this way, we can make sure that our products have less impact. Websites keep getting heavier and heavier. So I found this statistic that in the last 5 years, the median weight of a website grew by 25%. Does it mean that these websites actually get better by 25%? Well, not really. They're just heavier, maybe less efficient, and they are heavier because they can be. We have perfect broadband nowadays, and everyone can access them. But really, maybe we don't need to grow it as this much. The third guideline is to be open. Sustainability used to be a very narrow specialization, really an exclusive club, exclusive job for engineers who can actually demonstrate they can lower CO2 emissions of a product. And it's a little bit the same thing like Iga said in her first talk about research democratization. Some professionals still can't imagine non-researchers conduct research. It's the same with sustainability. Like some sustainability engineers just don't believe it's everyone should contribute to that. So I think it's all about normalizing the discussion about sustainability and assuming that we all have some impact on what we do, and we can all have positive impact. Once you start normalizing the discussion, it makes your stakeholders and co-workers start thinking about that impact, about the environment. I'm not sure if you remember that hype that was started a few years ago around how plastic straws kill marine life. But I remember that there was this huge discussion, and some opponents would say that this is only a tip of an iceberg, that plastic straws like 1% of the problem globally. But even having said that and starting that discussion in the media, it made really make regular people aware of the problem. And nowadays, when you ask anyone, probably in the streets of Krakow, they will tell you that plastic straws are harmful. So the same here, like if we start talking and normalizing a discussion about sustainable IT, the same way we talk about user research, the same way we talk about accessibility, maybe we can start making a bigger impact and bigger change. The next principle is to be honest. That's pretty much self-explanatory, but you can be honest on 2 levels. First of all, create honest products, no addictive or misleading products that lead your users to do things that are really harmful. But the second level is just being honest about what you do. I'm not sure if you know the term greenwashing. That greenwashing is basically saying you do something for the environment, while in fact you are not. It's lying. And my favorite example here is this well-known company H&M that advertises as a super green with their collection. But in fact, I mean, it's oxymoronic, because if you are in fast fashion, you cannot be green. So let's just try to avoid lying about about our sustainability practice. Build your products that help mitigate the climate change. So climate change is a fact. We cannot go back in time to the times before the Industrial Revolution. All that CO2 was already shipped to our atmosphere. But what we can do is to try use technology and our smarts to use for good and mitigate the damage that was already done. My favorite example here is search engine Ecosia, that plants trees for the income they generate through search and advertising. And that is really an impact you could do with technology. And the last principle is to create products that are resilient and that will be resilient for power scarcity. So, you know, we need to be prepared, and in the future, we won't be able to connect on daily basis, and electricity might be a scarcity. So we should try to research options for our products to be so resilient that we can operate and they keep their function, even if there is no more electricity. One of my favorite experiments that I can recall is that version of the online magazine called Low Tech that runs only on the solar power solar panel that is installed in apartment of a person and connected to the server, which is great because the website sometimes goes offline for some time, but still it's always up after the sun starts shining. So you know what are the principles of creating sustainable web, but how to measure sustainability in the digital world? Well, there are KPIs, very clear KPIs for sustainable web. Traditionally, metrics for websites and web apps focus on page views and the time spent on site. But these metrics usually are not optimized. They are usually optimized for advertising revenue, but they don't really tell you if users found what they were looking for. So this way, you know that majority of business developers would say that you usually want to keep users as long on the website as possible. But it's exactly the opposite for the sustainable goals. So to measure for sustainability, you can bring down pretty much every digital product to the carbon footprint. If you can calculate the data transfer needed for your website to access one page view, and you can combine it with electricity used for that and multiply by the carbon intensity of the grid that the user accesses that website on, you get a clear number of CO2 in grams or kilograms. And what is the carbon intensity of the grid? That might not be, you might not know that, but every electrical grid in every country, it can be assessed by how much grams of CO2 is produced for every kilowatt hour of electricity. And there's data like this collected. So this metric is pretty much well known. So if you are looking for measuring how your digital product is sustainable, I think calculating carbon footprint this way, I think it's the most, right now is the most correct way to do it. And if you already run a website, you can go to websitecarbon.com and basically that calculates that for you. So when making a product decision, we usually show that we take into account, one should take into account both user needs, business, and technology. But I think there's a fourth component to that, that is our planet, the Earth, and we should always consider our decisions with a little bit thought about what will be the impact on our planet's resources. And last but not least, I would like to recommend you some Masteries that inspired me to do this talk to you today. The first one is Sustainable Web Design by Tom Greenwood. That book is really a great overview of how we can make sure our web development strategies are sustainable. And the second one, which is pretty much for everyone, I strongly believe that every person on this planet should read it, is How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates, which is full of explanations, data, and really interesting point of view on the subject. Thank you very much for listening to me today. And since I cannot be with you there offline, I thought that maybe you have some questions or you would like to add something add. And if you want to reach me afterwards, you could also email me at Amelia Krysztofiak-Marcol at bshg.com.
Thank you, Amelia. Amelia, it almost felt like you were here. I'm sure some of you will reach Amelia. Unless someone has like one question. No, no questions is also a great answer. Thank you, Amelia, very much. A little applause or a big